What if we could have a greenhouse in the home? And you get these inevitable questions. Well, isn't that a lot of work? No, we've developed pods that are self-nurturing. It's a turnkey solution. Well, isn't that going to be a lot of energy consumption? No, we've developed a design that accommodates an industry-leading efficiency, meaning this uses no more energy than your refrigerator would have used to store the very vegetables that we can grow. And I find that to be the perfect kind of series of questions working with your mom or just an everyday community person, because that's highly scalable.
Just allowing yourself to embrace the opportunity, I think, Logan, is important too, right? So any partnership, any collaboration, you're gonna have to take a chance, right?
So what we are doing is no more different than just the ancient wisdom of, if you feed a man a fish, you feed him for a day, but if you teach him a fish, you feed him for life. We're following this ancient wisdom, but applying modern technologies to have a scalable, highly replicatable solution.
Welcome back to the Middle Tech Podcast. You've got Logan Jones here today, not joined by Evan Knowles, who is still up in vacation camping in Michigan. But today we got to sit down with Scott Massey, who is the co-founder and CEO of Anew, as well as Kirk Taylor, who is the co-founder and president of Land Betterment. So you might remember Land Betterment from, I believe it was episode 96, about 4 years ago. He is joining us again to talk about a new partnership that their company has formed with Anew. So they are partnering to build and sell autonomous fresh produce growing systems in EcoSolutions upcycled shipping containers. So a lot of the conversation revolved around the technology, the agriculture technology that Anew is building. Scott has an awesome story. He has worked incredibly hard to build the company and build it into what it is today. And it is really cool how Land Betterment and Anew came to form this partnership and what they're hoping to accomplish with this partnership. So if you're interested in ag tech, if you're interested in food security, this is a great episode for you. We get to dive into all sorts of different technologies that are supporting these autonomous growing systems. And I'm very excited for you guys to dive in and listen. Before we jump into this episode, though, let's just get a quick word from our sponsors. Before highlighting our sponsors, we'd just like to state that the views and content shared on this platform do not necessarily reflect those of our show sponsors. Middle Tech is presented by KY Innovation, the Kentucky Cabinet for Economic Development's Office of Entrepreneurship. KY Innovation exists to support and develop Kentucky's startup ecosystem, and we are proud to be supported by an organization whose mission aligns so closely with ours. If you're a founder building in Kentucky, you need to check out the resources that KY Innovation has to offer. You can find more information by clicking the link in our show notes or going to kyinnovation.com. Middle Tech is sponsored by Bolt Marketing. Take your website to the next level with a website that's built to work. At Bolt Marketing, they're revolutionizing websites for small businesses that are affordable, customizable, and hassle-free. Whether you have a construction company, a boutique clothing store, or you own a hot yoga studio, they have options for you. Click the link in our show notes to explore their marketing options that can transform your marketing and grow your business. And as a personal note, Bolt Marketing built our website, and they were awesome to work with throughout the entire process. We highly recommend working with. Middle Tech is also supported by Huntsicker, an impact venture studio based in Lexington, Kentucky. Huntsicker is creating companies out of the ordinary by founding and funding the next generation of purpose-driven startups. They partner with founders to create indispensable solutions to the world's most fundamental problems. On a quarterly basis, they host an invite-only intimate gathering called Fireside Convos, where attendees representing a wide network of stakeholders in the regional entrepreneurial ecosystem discuss timely topics, including the role of AI for startups out of Kentucky and the challenges of identifying and attracting talent. To be considered as a guest, visit huntsicker.co/fireside to apply. All right, welcome on to the Middle Tech Podcast, Scott Massey, and welcome back to the podcast, Kirk Taylor. Super excited to have you guys this morning. Scott, first time on the podcast. Kirk, it's been 4 years since we had you on the podcast, so quite a while since we got to talk last.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's been a very quick 4 years, and I can't believe it's been that long. So appreciate having us back, and I'm excited to talk about this partnership with Anew.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's the kind of the main topic of this podcast, aside from just talking about what Anew actually does. So that's kind of the first place I wanted to start off the podcast, but just to kind of frame things, you guys have entered a partnership with Anew to build and sell autonomous fresh produce systems using EcoSolutions upcycled shipping containers. And so, Kirk, I just want to start things off by doing a quick refresher on Land Betterment and what Eco Solutions actually is, so that when we dig into a new and all the technology there, listeners can kind of have a good understanding of what this partnership really entails.
Yeah.
So if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving us a quick refresher on the business, that would be great.
Yeah, no, appreciate it, Logan. When we talked last, right, we were trying to solve and still trying to solve two unique problems that are happening both in rural America, but also in urban America as well, right? How do you both solve an economic problem as well as a social problem? And we feel that bringing opportunity to communities that are often underserved is the best way to lift them up, right? Entrepreneurship, security, sustainability, all of those things can go together. And so Land Betterment has really just been focused on driving those initial pillars that we talked about 4 years ago. Food, housing, sustainable jobs that can lift up entire communities. And so one of the items that we saw in rural America was that there was acute lack of access to fresh produce. Many communities are the growers or producers of resources that are used elsewhere, but those actual community members cannot consume some of those resources that they produce or that are produced close to them. And so food was an important investment thesis for Land Betterment, and we were trying to solve both how do you bring the ability to grow fresh produce, but do it locally in a way that can actually help the community. And so we've made investments in large scale CEA because that does at least bring some of the fresh produce more local, but it was still a big hole in what we wanted to try to solve. And we're not engineers by trade, as you know, nor are we food scientists by trade. And so we were literally trying to create hydroponic growing systems ourselves to try to deliver it in a local fashion. Eco Solutions, as you know, is our backbone container company focused on sustainable housing, focused on disaster recovery. We also produce containers for various commercial needs. And we knew that it was a great delivery mechanism, right, for locally produced sustainable produce, but we didn't have the guts, the technology guts to make it work. And I know we'll get into a little bit more, but we were just super excited to come across Scott and Ivan and their team, who have best in class guts of a growing system that can be deployed anywhere, right? And so, Logan, as we've talked before, the uniqueness of an urban area or a rural area are actually very similar, right? Many of those cores have been passed over, right? The jobs that once drove people to move there are gone. The support systems are gone. But what we need to do is help restore the ability to let those communities sustain for themselves and nourish the kids and the community members in a way that is sustainable. It's not a one-time handout, right? But it's a way for them to actually grow the community together. And locally sourced produce is a great way to do that. And so thankful for the platform of Land Betterment. We have a great team that is pushing all of our fronts forward, but then it enables us to make these, what we hope is like generational partnerships with groups like Anew, and really take what we've kind of started and really take it to the next level. But appreciate having us back on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited to dig in more to what the partnership specifically means. But I think the next best place to go is talking about Anew and the technology that Scott and Ivan have built over there. So Scott, I'm going to start off by just asking you kind of a goofy question here. But how do you explain what you're doing to your mom? The reason I'm asking it that way is let's start at the most basic level and then build up from there.
Well, I guess first off, good morning, Logan. Thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to be
Of
on this
course.
podcast and so excited to be talking about this partnership. I really love that question. And I think that's the exact question that needs to be asked in this space. I've had the fun ability and experience to actually build this for my mom. We've developed a system that was for the household consumer. And we have really had this kind of fundamental approach early on that to make it as accessible. When I say accessible, I literally mean within arm's reach, that this is as easy to use as a Keurig equivalent experience. That is what we've developed, something that is a pod in and a plant coming out. Growing plants is this remarkably beautiful experience. And there's this profound psychological effect that happens when people see something growing. And I'm looking off the camera because I'm looking at the unit actually here in our office. I can show you real quickly if you still have the
Oh,
video
wow.
feed. You have
That's
this
so
just,
cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's, so when I say accessible, I really, really mean it. And I had just a really fortunate experience early on to make this accessible to my parents, kind of asking this, what if we could have a greenhouse in the home? And you get these inevitable questions. Well, isn't that a lot of work? No, we've developed pods that are self-nurturing. It's a turnkey solution. Well, isn't that going to be a lot of energy consumption? No, we've developed a design that accommodates an industry-leading efficiency, meaning this uses no more energy than your refrigerator would have used to store the very vegetables that we can grow.
Mm.
And I find that to be the perfect kind of series of questions working with your mom or just an everyday community person, because that's highly scalable. That means you've developed a solution that by a massive order of magnitude difference can be adopted by a much wider addressable population. So the
I love
question's
that.
not goofy at all. In fact, it is the exact question that needs to be asked.
I love that. I didn't even realize that it was going to be the right question to be asking here. I was just kind of trying to be funny for the listeners here. Um, but tell us the story about how you identified this problem that you set out to solve with Anew. I mean, and more specifically, like what made you want to start a company around it?
Yeah, those are two big questions. I think I almost need to kind of go back to just kind of my life story that led into this space briefly. I studied mechanical engineering technology while at Purdue University with an entrepreneurship certificate. And great university, great program, definitely gave me the personal disciplinary experience I needed, but also just the technical skills I needed to, I think, be impactful in an industry and ultimately create a career that would have exciting implications, not just for myself personally, but for society and the environment broadly. I originally worked in the oil and natural gas industry as what was essentially a petroleum engineer, moving liquids from point A to point B. I would design systems that would take liquids from boats to trains, trains to trucks, trucks to distribution centers, distribution center back to the end car. And I developed a really good technical understanding early on of fluid mechanics. And that was the exact understanding that NASA was actually looking for at Purdue University. They were looking for a mechanical engineer with very good application experience working with fluid mechanics systems that could take liquids from effectively point A to point B, but in this case, for hydroponics. And to summarize what hydroponics it is the combination of Greek words hydro, water, ponics to do work. And it is exactly as it sounds. It is to grow plants with water or without soil, as it's commonly called. We are recirculating nutrient solutions over the roots of the plants to get consistent growth without the use of soil. Why would NASA, a space exploration agency, be interested in hydroponics? Well, there is a huge challenge that needs to be resolved for permanent human habitation on future space colonies: food. We don't have soil and farmland available on the lunar or Martian surface or beyond. So there is now an urgent need for NASA to develop energy efficient, high yielding systems that are low maintenance to create a means of food production in these future space colonies. And this is happening at a rate, I think, much faster than people even anticipate. And NASA's focus with Purdue specifically was to optimize the energy efficiency. With LEDs, these new very efficient means of growing plants using LEDs, which stands for light emitting diodes, we can isolate specific wavelengths, or really just a fancy way to say colors. We can customize fancy colors of lights that can cause different rates of growth inside of plants. That's important because not all wavelengths are going to have the same effect on plant growth. So by focusing on the ones that are most important, most impactful on plant growth, we can really improve our energy efficiency. And that's so important because not only is the lighting using a lot of energy, recreating the sun being used in a hydroponic system, but lighting emits heat. So every single photon of light that we can optimize or eliminate as being necessary in the system, that not only has immediate energy savings on the lighting power usage, but then the heating remediation, the cooling energy usage required to remediate that heat inside the system. And so that is precisely what we were doing at NASA. We were optimizing the light intensity to perfect the overall energy efficiency of the system. I just became obsessed. I fell in love with this concept of being able to grow anything, anywhere. Agriculture has historically been limited by the availability of climate and the appropriate soil, kind of environmental geography types that we need to grow. And this was eliminating both of those variables. We were creating the climate that we needed, and we were using hydroponics to create the soil substitute needed to grow anywhere. But the problem was it was a research project. And I have great respect, unyielding respect for what they're doing in the labs and continue to do in the labs, literally moving humanity forward. But that's it. It's being really focused in that instance in time, and that was a 2016 timeframe, in research applications. And I saw an opportunity that if we could develop an even more energy efficient and modular, very key, modular system that could be rapidly deployed, then there could be an incredible business model, very much like Keurig, where there's a consumable component where an individual could grow vegetables and produce them at home. And I was very fortunate that while working for the oil company several years ago, I had introductory experience serving as a patent draftsman. So I had a very beginner's understanding of intellectual property in the filing process. And once I kind of had this idea of I want to form a business in this space, or at the very least develop a physical system that's going to have improved efficiencies, then I need to patent it. I need to really develop a robust intellectual property moat around this design. So it's something that can at least have meaningful support in the market, making it a sensible investment opportunity. But I really didn't think I was going to be that person. And it's almost kind of a funny thing to say, but I think I've almost kind of been a CEO or founder by default. I was really an engineer. I was really just fascinated with the technology. And I would say above all else, did not want to start a business, but was also grappling with the reality that I was 21 years old at the time in 2016. I had $5,000 to my name to build a single prototype. I mean, you're going to spend that amount and then some, as well as filing your patent expenses. And that increases at an exponential rate as time goes on. But I had a very, I think, realistic plan that if we could enter into these pitch competitions that Purdue and other universities had, I could take this capital risk and may be lucky enough to recoup that investment to continue the prototype development and the patent filing on the system. And it's crazy as this sounds, I really don't believe in master plans because I feel like they don't cover new reality. I think it was just an extremely pragmatic early on approach of setting a very immediately achievable goal, competing in these competitions, and using that funding to continue refining the product. But even then, and Purdue is not the only university that has these competitions. Ball State, Notre Dame, St. Louis University, University of Southern Indiana. We kind of road tripped around all across the Midwest our senior year competing for funding. That still wasn't enough. And even though that exceeded well over $100,000, which for a 21-year-old, 8 months into a business idea, that's kind of a wild change in what you thought was possible in your own abilities. We still didn't have the capital to continue the development needed to refine this prototype. So I started working night shifts as a full-time student. I was delivering newspapers for the Exponent, the Purdue West Lafayette newspaper.
I've got to interrupt this part of the story real quick because I remember when you were talking about this when we were on our intro call and you were like, I started delivering newspapers. I was like, this dude is a hustler. Like, not many people are going to take jobs getting up super early in the morning to go chuck newspapers around. I mean, that's what I'm envisioning anyway, is like chucking newspapers out the car at people's houses. I mean, I think that I just wanted to make a statement there that is just like the core of an entrepreneur. It's like, I might not have all the time to be doing a full-time job, but I'm going to figure out something that works. And I'm going to, figure out a way to get this money that I need to start my business. To go into the kind of agreement that you had with the paper as well, because you had kind of an interesting little arrangement going there.
Yeah, I think I was given maybe even above $9 an hour pay. And it was like a 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. shift every day. And so it was a little brutal, if I'm going to be honest. It was going to class, working on the startup idea, staying up late enough to start the delivery shift, and then They get 2 hours of sleep before starting the next day. You do that every day for 5 days. They didn't deliver on the weekends, thankfully. They need time to recoup on the sleep hours. But whenever we competed in these competitions, I begged the managing editor, who was a great guy, asked him, would you please publish this article I wrote? You can say you wrote it. I don't care. Take credit. But I would like to at least spread awareness of what we're doing, because I most certainly do not have the budget for marketing. And he agreed and said, yeah, sure, this is a cool story. And they published these articles, and just about every other 2 weeks, maybe every month, we'd win a competition. I was fortunate enough to have a front page article, and kind of unbeknownst to me, I start getting, half dozen people emailing me each time. Very critical to have your communications available on any sort of earned media approach like that. Reaching out to me stating that when this is ready, I want it. I want to be an early adopter. And I started hearing all these really profound stories from individuals. And I'm not going to say that I had this plan of taking this job to get free marketing. It just kind of happened as a result. I think I just got really lucky, just being at the right place in the right time. But I started hearing these really profound stories from individuals that had health ailments and had been recommended this kind of food as medicine or very clean diet approach of looking for produce options that did not have pesticide residues or concerns with preservative residues, wanted just a very clean food item, whether they're immunocompromised or had some sensitivity towards synthetic chemical residues on the actual plants themselves. In other instances, I would meet people that were just master gardeners and they loved growing vegetables, but they didn't like going to the nurseries to source their seedlings because that had pesticide residues on it or had pests on it, one of the two, and neither were anything that they wanted, and they were looking for their kind of own self-sufficient means of growing. And I think more than anything, it just gave me a platform to learn from why people would be interested in this. And before I kind of realized it, I had my pre-order list of early consumers all ready to purchase the system. So really just incredibly fortunate to have had very understanding people working with me at the time. I was very afraid I was going to have to drop out of college, which my parents were certainly not keen on, having seen 4 years of college work suddenly be at like 95% completion and say, I don't know if I'm going to cross the finish line. But I was deeply concerned I wasn't even going to make attendance requirements for my classes. And I was shocked just how supportive Purdue was as a whole, both at the research foundation level from investing and supporting startups, but from the academic perspective of the university, that when I had gone to my professors and said, I don't think this attendance thing is for me. This isn't going to work out. And if that's a deal breaker, we should just quit while we're ahead. And my professors were kind of stunned. They're like, who are you to ask that? I said, well, I've got this idea and I think it may turn into a job, but I'm working crazy hours and sometimes I'm delivering even later than what this is. And it overlaps with this class schedule. And I was shocked that my professors were overwhelmingly supportive and said, we will waive the attendance requirements, but you must understand we're giving you what you're asking for. You've just lost your grade buffer. Now your tests, your exam scores, that just went from 60 to 80% of your effective grade in the class. We hope you know what you're doing. And just so lucky to have had so many supportive people, because if any one of those people had said no over the years, there's a very high probability that we would not be at this point today talking about this partnership.
Man, I wish Evan was here for this interview, because he had a similar experience at UK. He wasn't necessarily starting his own company, but he was with a very high growth startup at the time, and he was having to travel to New York, to LA to take these meetings, and had the same situation where he was not able to be as present as he needed to be in his classes. He didn't handle it quite as gracefully as you did. I think he kind of went to professors and was like, I'm going to be gone, and that's just going to be the way it is. Ended up working out all right for Evan, but it sounds like you managed to navigate that gracefully and have a good relationship with your professors coming out of it as well, which I think is a very important aspect of getting through college. But I would love to understand a little bit more about Anu. Help us understand how this company makes money. What's the revenue model here? So you mentioned a couple, getting some early adopters, but where are you looking now in terms of where the revenue is going to come from?
So really 3 pillars in the business. You have physical hardware, so the actual growing system itself, which needs to be very durable, very reliable, extremely efficient. So a very high fidelity product is absolutely needs to then create the means to have a reliable recurring revenue subscription on the consumable. and they depend upon each other. If the hardware is not reliable, then the subscription is not reliable either from a recurring revenue standpoint. We're fortunate to have attracted a great partner, Eco, through the Land Betterment company, to be able to work and incorporate a high fidelity product that incorporates our technology in a trusted brand that consumers can work with. And then there's data, and that would be the third pillar. And it's very, very early to even perceive or predict what that can be. But it gives us this very unique opportunity to learn and observe what's happening in the field and to constantly improve our offerings to ensure that we are always giving the best subscription experience possible with the consumables.
Very cool. And just to help listeners kind of understand, what it would look like if they were using this product. You mentioned these pods that are going in these growing towers. Just kind of walk us through, like in a very, hands-on sort of way, what would it look like for a consumer to be using Anews products?
Yeah. Well, it helps to have my display here for you to actually see. I can step over. I'm not sure if video is going to carry over, but for the podcast viewers that are listening on just the audio, imagine a wine cooler or a refrigerator, something that you would historically see as being a receptacle of food, now being a source. So nothing that would be otherwise the tomb of food would rot, actually the womb, something that's more creative, something that's producing the life itself. What we see when we open the door, opening this controlled environment system, is this beautiful assortment of greens and fruiting varieties all growing concurrently on the same tower. So it works. The way it grows is almost a bit the way a rotisserie chicken would actually cook something. When you think of a rotisserie chicken, the chicken's obviously the subject matter. It's rotating, and the heat emitters, those are your energy source. That way you have fewer energy emitters, and you're evenly cooking all the way around that chicken. But in this case, in rotary aeroponics, we're replacing the subject matter with plants, and our energy emitters are lights. So you'll notice that the lights are not intrusive. They're shining only on the plants themselves. This has a great user experience consideration that we're never overwhelming anybody. We're keeping the energy focused on the actual plants themselves, but we're also minimizing our over LED count by rotating it. So we have huge energy savings by reducing the total LED count, which would normally have to be all 360 degrees of this tower. But by only illuminating a small portion, energy savings immediate with fewer LEDs, and then compounding energy savings because fewer LEDs emit much less heat inside the system. So that's at least how the light emission kind of energy standpoint works from growing. From a more mechanical perspective, it operates a bit like a dishwasher internally, where we're circulating nutrients over a closed loop, all within the chassis of what's a wine cooler. So it can very easily fit within the actual set standard dimensions of consumer cabinetry, but is also versatile for larger commercial applications as we have with the container.
And so whenever something, let's say, comes in bloom and you harvest it off of this device, is it as simple as just getting some new pods from Anew, and then you go and take the old pod out that has all the growth out of it and then put a new one in? Or talk a little bit about that part specifically. Yeah,
I think to really even answer this, I want to work backwards from a product that I think does this extremely well, and that's Keurig. Keurig has a great experience of putting a pod in and taking a cup of coffee finished out. And if you want to make another cup of coffee, you put another pod in, you put another cup in, and the process repeats itself. And consumers love that because it's convenient and turned what was traditionally a 5-minute exercise, a slow drip coffee of putting grounds in the filter, filling the reservoir, all that, into something that's pretty much immediate turnkey. And our pods follow that exact same experience process. We take what's normally a very laborious process for indoor growing, where users have to be experts in macro, micro, secondary nutrient ratios and pH chemistry management. It's been a major limiting factor where effectively users have to be chemists or agronomists to know how to farm. We eliminate that requirement outright with self-nurturing pods, where the pods contain all the necessary nutrients a plant needs to grow. It simply goes in and that plant comes out. And while I do make that Keurig analogy often, I want to be really mindful about how seriously we interpret sustainability as a business, because it's not just a talking point. It's a very strong action point for us. We have developed home compostable pods, plant-based biopolymers, but can naturally degrade and decompose within a consumer's composting environment. home compostability is the most difficult certification standard to achieve for any sort of consumable. Industrial compostability is a great step, but still requires downstream processing of the end good before it can fully degrade. So we've gone to great lengths to develop a compostable consumable that can naturally degrade, which is really advantageous for these users that are sometimes transplanting seedlings to the outdoor growing environment, or harvesting and then replanting that root mass. And we're seeing secondary and tertiary harvests all from the same pod becoming carbon negative. That's a really, really cool experience to see, because we didn't tell anybody to do that. That was just a natural consumer behavior pattern that was observed in the field.
So cool. So cool. I'm really excited to really dive into how the Eco Solution Partnership and the Land Betterment Partnership really expands this out and brings it to kind of a commercial application. Before we get there, though, I think it'd be useful for, we have a lot of entrepreneurs that listen to this podcast. You talked about getting the capital. You talked about doing the pitch competitions. The two things I'd just like to hear you hit on just real briefly here. You mentioned raising a friends and family round, and you mentioned Purdue Research Foundation putting some money in as well. Would just love to hear your experience with raising those two different tranches of capital, what it was like to go to your friends and family and tell them what you were doing and the reception to it, and then any of the dynamics with Purdue Research Foundation, how they invested and what that experience was like. That would be I think useful for people that listen to this.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully I don't sound preachy when I say what I'm going to say, but I practice it. And I think it's something that a lot of entrepreneurs need to hear, because there's sometimes this arbitrary advice being told to people that you need to fundraise, then develop the product. And I completely reject that in every sense of the word. And I understand that each industry is going to be different, but I firmly believe that getting to a minimum viable product and getting that early user feedback is so critical that if anybody is to really invest in what you're doing, it's kind of as simple as just knowing that if it's good enough for you, it's good enough for me. If you personally are willing to put your own personal capital dollars and then the hours it takes to continue funding that going forward into something, then it's a good investment. And if you personally are not doing that first, then you're going to have a really hard time pitching this to an experienced investor who likely got to that standpoint simply because they went through that same trial and tribulation themselves. And I find that people who've been through that can recognize that very, very quickly. So anytime I meet a young person, focus on what you can personally produce. If there is some sort of advanced skilled individual that you need to hire or contract for labor, find a way to teach yourself those skills, if at all possible. You'll find that you can deliver, even if it's to a smaller degree of effectiveness, but you will find that what you can deliver early on will set such a clear roadmap of what needs to be developed long term that it will dramatically multiply the efficiency of the capital investment versus asking someone to effectively set the vision for you. That is the founder's objective of all else, I would say, is to set that vision and to really maintain that vision. And eventually you will reach limits, as I did, where you can only work so many hours in a week and you can only make so many dollars per hour, especially when you're a young, relatively inexperienced person. Then start competing in these competitions. There are fantastic non-dilutive capital sources. And this is throughout the world, but it's very much an American thing to have this kind of Shark Tank style thing to stand up in front of a group of strangers and to let them tear you apart. And you should be able to crave that. A really good founder should be craving that creative feedback and even outright destructive feedback. You should be looking for people that are very critical of your business model, because you need to be able to stand up and actually answer each and every one of those points. And you'll find that there's a finite number of questions that people can ask in such a short amount of time that they have in that environment. But these questions are just going to be so valuable as you form your business later on. And moving on from competitions, which I like, and I'm very specifically recommending competitions and grants in that order. And they're two different things. Competitions typically focus more on the business model. You need to really define what it is your business model is. Be flexible, respond to market opportunities and challenges as they come. But grants, and I'm talking about the more significant state and federal research grants, they're more research optimization. Once you have identified a business model and a technology shortcoming that is struggling to fully support what that business model needs to be, now you have a fantastic use case for very significant state and federal grants. And these can be several $1,000,000 to further the development timeline. And for our specific instance, we were very fortunate to get National Science Foundation grants, phase 1, phase 2. And that funding gave us an incredible opportunity to collaborate with great institutions like Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and others that gave us extremely advanced lighting technologies to further enhance a lot of the same research I was doing at Purdue, which this kind of becomes full circle. Some of the individuals that I worked for or did research with part of at universities became contractors or scientific advisors of sorts to us as a business. So I never really left university. And when eventually Purdue had the Accelerator Fund, a venture capital fund through the Purdue Research Foundation, and I approached it, I was admittedly very scared at the time. I was 21 years old. There was individuals I was competing with, and that was kind of a cross between the business and the research funding. You'll find that universities are a bit more patient on the research application of funding, but they want to see a clear business model defined. I was, as far as I'm aware, the only one competing there that didn't have a PhD, let alone having finished my bachelor degree yet. So I was completely out of my league by far. But I had a prototype to demonstrate. I had users that had indicated order, and I had a very clear proposition of what needed to be refined on the system to make it more competitive in the market to support that business model. And I have to say the terms and the support I've gotten from the Purdue Research Foundation has been absolutely amazing, because that was the first investment I took as a business. Up to that point, I was working like crazy, all hours, competing, putting personal capital back into the business, had done everything I avoided to avoid any form of equity dilution or new capital coming in, because I wasn't sure what that could mean as far as the impact on the vision and the business going forward. I don't even think at the time I was really even familiar what governance actually meant as an entity. But I found it was probably one of the best decisions I had ever made, was to take the capital that the Purdue Research Foundation has provided. Not only did they provide capital that was very much needed as the business at a critical development point, but they continue to support the companies that they invest into. Purdue is this massive, fantastic entity, but it has so many capabilities. I mean, if we just want to talk about the Purdue Office of Professional Practice with people like Joseph Tour and Patrick Francis, they're giving students scholarships to work for us as a business. I think the amount of capital that's been provided to us through all these other kind of supplemental approaches has at this point either exceeded or even multiplied what the actual capital investment was to us as a business. So I just can't be thankful enough. I can't state how graciously thankful we are to have had the support we did at Purdue and the leadership of people like Mitch Daniels that had done a great job creating intellectual property policies that if you were an undergrad student and you funded and created your own invention, you owned your invention. You had the rights to pursue it. And that degree of clarity, could have been the difference of staying at Purdue and not for me early on.
Yeah. And that's, kudos to Purdue for doing that, because that really makes or breaks an innovation ecosystem at a university. When a university is trying to get their hands on, inventions and innovations that students are, pushing forward, that's when you typically run into problems. But man, I have to commend you for all these decisions that you made as a young entrepreneur. I mean, you've gone the path that is a lot harder to go, but it's certainly paying off for you at this point. And just for our listeners, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you at this point?
I'm 29 years old.
29. That's awesome, dude. Yeah, you're crushing it. Well, cool. We talked a lot about Anew here. I'd love to dive into the partnership with EcoSolutions, with Land Betterment. Kirk, you've been nice and patient over there, so I want to jump back over to you real quick. We've had a lot of fun talking to Scott about the Anew story, but tell us about the Land Betterment side of this partnership. What is your all's role in this partnership with Anew?
Yeah, no, obviously every day we work with Scott and Ivan and the team. We learn more and we're blown away by the capabilities. So you just saw just the tip of the iceberg there in that backstory. But as a certified B Corp, we look at opportunities holistically, right? So not only the monetary upside or impact but also the community upside and impact, as well as the environmental upside and impact. And as Scott was going through, all of the positive business solutions sides to the technology also have positive environmental and community aspects as well. And so they're not really trade-offs of we want to maximize crop output, so we're going to, have higher energy input. They're actually supportive of each other, right? So we're growing better produce while reducing energy consumption. Now, that makes sense from a business standpoint because we're using less kilowatts, less dollars and cents to grow a plant, but it also helps from the footprint of the carbon footprint of what we're trying to grow. And it also helps in the geography of where we want to grow that produce. So the lower the resources needed to grow the pure produce, the more areas you could put them in, right? And so that's one of the I think the most interesting aspect of the solution that Scott and Ivan have created is this high efficiency, low footprint growing platform. And so, Scott, how tall is that growing tower in the prototype unit you have in your office? That would say less than 3 feet or so?
Yeah.
So that's one unit, right? 3 feet tower, well, 3-foot tower. If we look at taking that technology and putting it in a 20-foot shipping container, we go to 14 towers at about 7 to 8 feet tall, right? And so you're taking the same technology, the same backbone, and multiplying it, nearly exponentially, right? And then you look at how can we deliver multiple containers to a food desert, right? So now you're not taking, one tower at 3 feet tall to 14 at 8. Now you're saying that's times 2, 3, 4, right? And so the impact that can be delivered is nearly exponential. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of where we fit in, right? So Pete Rodriguez and the Eco team have been great innovators of providing solutions within a container, doing it economically at the technical specifications needed for what we're delivering, right? So anyone can make a fancy container of something once for a very high price. That doesn't really work as you try to scale across multiple sales channels. And so, Scott and the team and Pete and Stetson, our team, have worked, I would say, hand in hand for a better part of 12 months or so to create the first prototype container, which is growing produce currently in Evansville today. And it's a constant learning process, which I think is a big testament to Scott and the team. A lot of times you'll find an entrepreneur has that idea, right? That one good product, and then they think that it is already perfect, right? And it is good to go. We don't need to make any changes. When we walk through their facility, I mean, Scott, how many units of R&D are you actively monitoring on a daily basis?
A lot. And
a lot.
And
growing. And so it's not we did it one time and this is perfect and now we just want to sell it to somebody else. It is how do we constantly get better, which I think is eye-opening for us too, right? So we deliver the first container prototype, and the team, they've already innovated past that, right? They already saw higher cost items that could be reduced. They saw, high things that could be a slow supply chain process. Those have been eliminated and scaled down, really trying to optimize what version 2 is going to be like, right? As we take our pre-orders for the containers, how do we deliver, version 2, right? And then how do we plan for version 3? That's kind of how Pete and the team's background fit in. How do you scale production in an efficient manner that can be replicated, what we hope to be, thousands of times, right? In a version that meets, geographic needs and different produce needs, right? One thing I think that Scott touched on briefly was that third pillar of potential revenue stream. It's in the nascent stage now, but it's information, right? And I wouldn't mind, Scott, if you could just touch on briefly the acute amount of seed data and growing data that you're able to capture, and how that helps us both just with data, but also how it helps the system learn to continue to get better and grow better produce more efficiently. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think to really answer that, we almost have to take a step back to three words you said that I really liked, and it was holistic, it was modular, and then it was learning. The holistic approach of making this accessible in the communities that need it is a fundamentally different approach than trying to scale a massive, centralized, non-replicatable operation. And that came with a profound set of understandings early on that it had to have some level of autonomy and observation capabilities that centralized facilities may not see as a priority focus of development as they're trying to optimize efficiency before developing a roadmap to have a scalable solution. And I think that's why the partnership works so fantastic with each other, is that Eco is an inherently modular, scalable company repurposing containers, which is extremely sustainable, but also rapidly deployable. And the time it would take years to plan, permit, build a centralized operation, they can install and deploy in hours and may even experience an ROI in that comparable amount of time. And that makes it very repeatable. And I don't think this could have worked any other ways, because for us to perfect things like what we call kind of our environmental recipes, temperature, humidity, everything that we define as climate or the environment around the plant growth, it would have been virtually impossible for us to fund that development of research if we had acres of greenhouses trying to recreate that environment, consuming, like, at that point, nearly like square miles of land. Even to do so in containers would be extremely difficult. But to have appliances stocked on one of each other, and for me to independently isolate control variable, and the rate at which I can learn in that was so exponential. And then now applying that level of learning, so combining the observations, and I mean the actual visual image of the plant's growth, so looking at physiology, the hue, the rate of growth, looking at all these things that we just almost take for granted. We have this profound nervous system on the human body, but now embedding that into a control sequence that observes and learns on the actual units themselves. We're in a stage today where you could probably think of it as supervised machine learning, where we're growing, we're conducting the experiments, we're collecting the data, but we're also cross-referencing that with images. And that has a very exciting future of becoming increasingly unsupervised and then autonomous, optimizing a performance across that entire base. That's a scalable, that is an inherently replicatable, standardized process. And Peter's experience working in the automotive industry has just been so incredibly important to bring that level of consistency and standardized manufacturing on the physical hardware, because it's really turning what has effectively been a construction industry play now into a manufacturing play for commercial scale growing.
Man. Yeah, I love the way you described the how the modular design of these units allow for that just better control and a lot easier path to autonomy. I think that's a brilliant design. I'm curious, what was the story of how this partnership came to be? Was this who found who? How did this partnership arise?
So
Kirk.
we were trying to do this, and so Pete and Stetson and their team made a prototype of a rotary tower to fit into a container a couple of years ago, and very obviously rudimentary. And I think they had a hand crank or something to turn it.
Yeah.
But Scott has, as you very, very humbly put, you've skipped over a lot of your accolades and awards, but I kept seeing profiles of them on LinkedIn. And so as another Indiana company, it came out of Purdue, and obviously Purdue has a tremendous track record of delivering exceptional engineers and ideas and entrepreneurs, we reached out to them, I think through LinkedIn, and we said, we've been trying to work on this, but we want to find somebody who actually knows how to do it. And I think that Scott was like, well, we're trying to find somebody who can help do it in a bigger bigger delivery system, right? And so that's kind of how it started. And then I think that, I'll let Scott talk, but I think it was just a little bit of both of us being just really honest, saying, we want to be in this space from our side, and we need an expert to help us do it. How can we support that? I think that we try to be as transparent as possible. I think a lot of times deals and partnerships fail to progress because people take kind of a negotiating stance or a combative stance in the front, put up their guards, and kind of move away from the opportunity. But we kind of just embraced, the team and kind of were, I feel like, pretty honest on where we wanted it to go, and then kind of let the development and engineering and the construction and manufacturing kind of evolve naturally, I would say, Scott.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
awesome.
and it's funny to hear you explain the history of having developed an initial rotary tower, because that is exactly what we did, but only probably at that point 4 years before that, when it had been done by ECO back in 2016. That's how we initially made this. We were actually boring holes into PVC pipes and creating these vertical conduit systems. And we eventually have reached the point where it can grow plants and it can rotate. And then you do that for a period of time. But then these very seemingly small but significant details start to really become prevalent, like cleaning. How is maintenance of the system actually approached? How is the manufacturing of this approached? And we eventually came to the conclusion that it needed to be a stackable design, something that easily allowed a highly replicatable component to be stacked that, very importantly, fits in a dishwasher. So it's something that could be 8 feet tall when fully assembled, but has the ability to be very easily and rapidly disassembled and reassembled for cleaning purposes, which for any indoor growing or biological process, critical. That's a super critical thing. And we found that that was an entirely open domain of inventions and product design, which we were fortunate to, I think, have made a lot of very rapid progress because of the availability of 3D printers right at that point, just reaching this total proliferation where the cost parity had gone down so much. I could actually afford to have 8 3D printers in a room and produce parts for a limited product launch and evaluate the feedback before eventually moving to an injection mold tool design. We reached a point where when Ivan and Ivan's my co-founder in the business and he was my coworker for the NASA research study at Purdue. But when we were living in a house together, producing these parts in Washington, Indiana, it was just a crazy environment. I mean, I think we were breaking every zoning law imaginable running a business in a residential home. Ivan was working incredibly hard. He had a full-time job managing a grain processing, chemical processing plant as an electrical control engineer, but would get off work at 4 p.m., work with me till 2 a.m., eventually fall asleep, and then go to work at 7 a.m. the next day and repeat that cycle. And while I was living in his house and turning it into a factory for these limited volumes of initial prototypes and appliances, we had this wall of 3D printers printing all the components. I would sleep on an air mattress. And if you're anyone who's experienced with 3D printing, it's not near as turnkey as they make it out to be. It's a quite hands-on process. You can catch a failure and sometimes save a part, which means you just preserve 36 hours of machine time if you catch it as it's happening. And I got to the point where I could be sleeping next to these printers, and if I would hear a squeal or a noise that indicated a machine failure, I would wake up and immediately jump on it and do it. And it actually took me a while to get out of that mindset of being able to just sleep calmly.
You got PTSD.
Maybe a little bit, but post-traumatic 3D printing syndrome. But it definitely took that learning process to rapidly prototype, see its performance. Very critical details, like just seeing how water behaves on a surface can have profound impacts on the way a plant grows. And eventually getting that hardware to a point it was robust, we could then focus our priority focus on the consumables. And then eventually the control system. But yeah, the partnership could not have really happened any other way.
I love that. I love the power of LinkedIn, the almighty LinkedIn, where so much opportunity arises from.
But also just allowing yourself to embrace the opportunity, I think, Logan, is important too, right? So any partnership, any collaboration, you're gonna have to take a chance, right? And there's failure rate. There's a non-linear path to success, but being open and aware of opportunity, I think, is important too. And obviously, we're just very, very excited. We've had a prototype deliver for about 2 months, and I guess, Scott, maybe briefly, and then we can talk about sales channels, but briefly just talk about how that prototype testing the container has gone and kind of where we're at from a larger scale mechanism standpoint now.
Yeah, I want to echo the need for openness to opportunity and how important it is to be just holistically focused on what you're doing and being flexible with the technology to execute on that vision. So we have always been primarily focused on developing what was effectively a consumer growing appliance, but I didn't found this company with my co-founder to build appliances. We did so to make food accessible to the communities that need it. And we're somewhat agnostic to the means in which we can actually deliver that, but we want it to be as efficient and economically and environmentally sustainable as possible. So it's replicatable, it can be self-supporting. While we were building these prototypes, I started getting lots of inquiries from food deserts who were not in a market to purchase what was certainly a higher end premium appliance. And I'm talking about food deserts on the African continent and even some in the United States. We as a business had spent a lot of nights and weekends, and I'll spend kind of my personal vacation time advising a lot of Department of State or other community food desert relief programs building commercial scales. And this is for the last 6 years we've been doing this, creating increasingly more automated community hydroponic farms that started with just kind of very standard NFT nutrient film technique systems a consumer could build with readily available materials at a hardware store, but eventually getting to the point where we would take elements of our design and apply it into kind of low cost but highly productive systems. And this gave us a really profound learning experience. And this sounds like a trivial detail, but it's hugely significant. When we develop this self-nurturing consumable experience with all those nutritions, everything the plants need to grow inside the consumable, that also means we are taking it upon ourselves to be the chemistry experts. And to grow 60 plants in a residential appliance, that can work very well. We perfected that design. But to make sure that same consumable can now grow on a commercial tower of 300 plus plants, that takes a very high degree of testing needed to confirm the chemistry is going to be viable to support that plant outcome. And while we think of this container as kind of the pilot farm, realistically, we've had these kind of proof of concept 8-foot tall vertical towers now for well over 5 years operating in these educational and kind of food desert environments where you may not think of as being a very high-tech prototype development period, but provided us capital to solve a challenge that the community was facing, but to perfect that optimization. What we're seeing today is just fantastic growth. I wish I could take the container inside of the building. Unfortunately, it's difficult to fit something that's 8 feet by 9 feet through a doorway. But what you see in the actual appliance here is essentially what we are seeing on the container, maybe to an even greater extent in the container, because the container gives us the ability to have a fully dedicated environmental chamber versus making this cohesive with an existing building or residential home space, if that makes sense. So what we're seeing is really a CapEx and an OpEx that I think has really exceeded our expectations of what the space was going to be. You'd see rated system components, the kind of maximum allotted power usage a component's going to use, but you never know what your power usage is going to be until you actually see it deployed in the field in an operational environment. Once you're actually deployed and have proven viability in an operational environment, then you can look at what really OpEx is as a system. And we found that I think we've really exceeded all of our own even internal expectations, which if anything is just a testament to what this partnership is able to support for growers around the world.
I love it. And just real briefly, as we wrap up here, talk about what your vision is for the future of this partnership. Like, what do you want to see this grow into?
Holistically,
yeah, go ahead, Scott. Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's food accessibility. This may sound grandiose or overambitious, but a mentor told me at one point, if your dreams don't scare you, they're probably not big enough. I think that this whole premise of soilless farming should be applied in a system that's modular and does not require to be physically committed to the soil it sits upon. So it's readily available, it's readily deployable, it's accessible to everybody, particularly in the neighborhoods and communities that are the most food insecure, that are the most nutrient insecure, and are going to benefit greatly by having a localized supply chain, not just in their food production, but in job creation, economic, sustainable job creation that could become multi-generational wealth. To me, that is what could work immensely towards eradicating hunger, eradicating nutritional insecurity, and maybe even eradicating poverty. And it may start here in the Midwest. Perhaps this could be achieved on a national level or a North American continental level in our lifetime. And if we work really, really hard, this technology has potential to even address food insecurity on a global basis by working with communities directly. And this has been done before through the Victory Garden movement of the World War II era. It's unfortunate that it required a global world war to cause this sort of thing to happen, but there have been mass social gardening experiments in American history where more than half of all the food consumed in America was grown in backyards, alleyway trellises, home gardens. So what we are doing is no more different than just the ancient wisdom of if you feed a man a fish, you feed him for a day, but if you teach him a fish, you feed him for life. We're following this ancient wisdom, but applying modern technologies to have a scalable, highly replicatable solution.
That's inspiring. Super inspiring. Well, for anybody that is listening to this and thinks it's as cool as inspiring as I do, and they're thinking, how can we help? How can we connect people to Anew? How can people help you? Who are you looking to connect with? Tell the audience, anybody listening out there, what are some ways that they could get involved and help you guys out?
Following us on social media, Grow, Grow, Anew, ANU, is a great way to stay in touch. But if you want to be meaningfully a part beyond an observational support, we love our followers. But if you want to be a part of the actual revolution, boots on the ground, farming and producing for your community, we want to work with you. We want to hear from you. Please reach out to us on our website, through social media. And we want to find ways to work with food serving institutions, whether it's a school, a cafeteria, even a traditional grocery store environment. We're looking at non-traditional applications of the technology, places like government applications, places that want to produce food on site. These institutions and schools that can be part of an experiential learning opportunity for the students, but also shepherd in the next generation of talent that we're going to hire as we grow to meet this demand. These are the partners we want to work with these initial pilot farms.
Awesome. Well, it's been an awesome conversation, Scott and Kirk. Thank you guys so much for taking time out of your morning to come and talk about the partnership and about Anew. I'm leaving the conversation feeling inspired and excited for you guys. So going to be a lot of fun to track the progress as you guys build out this partnership, and hopefully we can have you guys on. We won't wait 4 years until next time. Maybe another year or 2 years, and we'll see where you guys are at that point. But it's been so much fun learning about what you guys are doing.
Yeah, awesome, Logan. Thanks for having us on. Tell Evan we said hi.
Thank you.
Will do. All right, guys. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.
Thanks.
Take care.